People know enough about nuclear war to be very frightened. As a result, the past few decades have seen the emergence of a new phenomenon in the West, a peace movement with a mass following. Its strength waxes and wanes as the fear of imminent war rises and falls, but it's now a permanent political reality in every Western country.
I can't believe that the UN and all the people running it and all the governments could ignore something like this. And I think this one has everybody's heart in it. And the masses, how could they be ignored? I don't see how. Pray to God that I'm saying that it's the truth from my lips into God's ears.
Right? Look at him. Take a picture of him. Look at him.
What about him?
He's got a communist thing on his front of him, and he's knocking the American flag. I fought for this country.
Primitive nationalism is not the only argument the peace movement faces, however. It must also contend with some very sophisticated nationalism, which argues that the countries of the world can continue to do business in the old ways despite nuclear weapons. No painful sacrifices of national independence to some alien international authority are needed. The nation can still defend its own interests by military force if necessary, while avoiding nuclear war by deterrence. The peace movement is on the wrong track, they say. Even if deterrence should fail, which of course it won't, there's always Star Wars. President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative is a classic American attempt to solve a political problem with technology. As sheer technological escapism, it's quite wonderful, a real-life video arcade. But of course, it isn't really just defensive. If the United States ever actually got an even partially effective defense against Soviet missiles, it would be freer to threaten Moscow with its own nuclear weapons.
So long as the United States, its allies, want to deter a war without having powerful armies to match the Soviet army, they must do so by relying on nuclear weapons, whether they'll say so or not, like it or not. And when you rely on nuclear weapons, you have to have a qualitative advantage or a numerical advantage. And so all the armaments developments can be traced back, whether it is Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative today, where it was the introduction of the first battlefield nuclear weapons 30 years ago, all traces back to this attempt to maintain a balance by adding nuclear weapons in along with the inadequate ground forces to match the Soviet army.
But the real issue with Star Wars is not whether it'll work well enough to frighten the Russians. It's whether it can convince ordinary people on our own side that their leaders have things under control. And just as people's faith in the ability of deterrence and nuclear weapons to keep them safe forever was wearing thin, surprise, they're offered a whole new technology of space defenses to stop the enemy from hurting them. Whatever the technological doubts about Star Wars, psychologically it's brilliant. If people will just go along with the existing strategies and weapons for the time being, it promises, then they can have a really safe system of defense sometime in the future. Keep calm and keep quiet. We do have things under control. You will be safe from nuclear war eventually. In military terms, it's childish because all air and space defense works by attrition. Some portion of the attacking weapons will get through any defense, and if they're nuclear weapons, even a very small fraction is far too many. President Eisenhower, who'd been a professional soldier all his life, explained the grim and permanent realities of our situation to the United Nations over 30 years ago.
Let no one think that the expenditure of vast sums for weapons and systems of defense can guarantee absolute safety for the cities and citizens of any nation. The awful arithmetic of the atomic bomb does not permit of any such easy solution. Even against the most powerful defense, an aggressor in possession of the effective minimum number of atomic bombs for a surprise attack could probably place a sufficient number of his bombs on the chosen targets to cause hideous damage.
Star Wars has been a great popular success, but the political need for it demonstrates the underlying strength of the peace movement, whose doubts about the credibility of any military defense policy in the nuclear age were becoming embarrassingly difficult to answer. But the case should not be overstated. The Star Wars project did not save the U.S. government from an irresistible political demand for disarmament. The American people's genuine fear of the enemy, the Soviet Union, is far too strong for that.
The hard question Western disarmers can never answer is, where are your equivalents in the Soviet Union? After all, the question goes, if there's no pressure for change here, how can you expect the West to change? Well, there is protest in the Soviet Union. There's an official Soviet Peace Committee with some 80 million members, and it holds rallies and marches like this all the time. But its efforts are directed solely against Western nuclear weapons. The system works differently here.
What makes the Soviet peace movement different from Western peace movements is its official status. The Soviet Peace Committee's policies are those of the Soviet government, which regards its own missiles as defensive and peace-loving.
And we who are here from many countries will be able to tell the world that the citizens of Moscow gathered here today pledge themselves, as always, for peace, for the peace program of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, for the peace initiatives of the Soviet Union. Moscow is for peace. The peace movement is stronger today than at any time before.
Движение сторонников мира сегодня сильно как никогда.
This is all pretty sorry stuff. A peace rally by invitation only, where an audience selected by the government listens to speakers telling them that the arms race is all the other side's fault. But Western governments say exactly the same thing, even though they don't hold peace rallies.
Western peace marchers look pretty impressive, but the story of disarmament in the West hasn't been exactly a success story either. And there is a reason for this. Most people do want peace. It's really a motherhood issue. Probably nobody wants peace more than the Russians. They still remember their 20 million dead from the last World War. But everybody's also caught up with the idea of security, the need to protect against what others, the enemy, might do to them.
The Soviet and American governments try to make themselves secure by aiming nuclear weapons at each other's citizens. The Soviets say that their missiles are peace-loving. America's Strategic Air Command claims that peace is our profession. But a nuclear warhead will still kill these people, even if you call it a rosebud. Russian and American citizens are fellow prisoners, held hostage by ways of thinking about national interests and how you protect them that are obsolete and lethal in a world where total war means exactly what it says. Maybe there's no better way, in which case we will, sooner or later, go into the cold and the dark of a nuclear winter. Certainly our governments have found no way of changing the system, but then they are the system.
No government's going to surrender power to the UN unless it absolutely has to. And since disarmament necessarily involves handing over real power to some higher authority so it can protect you, governments are not going to disarm voluntarily either. They understand very clearly that arms and national independence are inseparable. And frankly, the peace movement's not likely to force governments into disarmament anytime soon. For one thing, it's not just governments that would hate a UN with real power. Lots of ordinary people would too. Conflict's not going to disappear from the world, and a powerful UN would have to make decisions and impose them on individual countries. Every time we create a new layer of government, we create a new set of constraints to chafe against. But as Sherlock Holmes used to say, when you've eliminated all the impossible solutions for a problem, what you're left with, however unlikely, is the answer. And the only answer to our problem is the UN. The longer the great powers stall on handing their sovereign right to defend themselves over to the United Nations, as they all agreed to do in 1945, the greater the danger that we'll run out of